Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, January 19th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we are digging into a few recent news and notes. Not a ton happening this week, but a few important items to pass along before we dive into draft strategy. Flow charts, decision trees, working backwards to solve the problem. Lots of ways to describe it. We're going to dig into some of how we go through building teams and what we think about this time of year from a broader perspective, especially because we're doing a couple of draft and hold leagues right now and testing a few things out and probably learning a few things along the way. I had a hypothetical I threw out there on Twitter earlier this week that I'm going to turn into a podcast segment so we can get excited about that. We got a couple mailbag questions that we'll probably squeeze in.
Is that the one about podcasts?
The vending machine full of vending machines. Can you imagine if that thing got jammed? Oh, watch your hands, buddy.
Don't tip that one on top of yourself. Yes. We in high school and at boarding school we tipped the vending machine and it landed on our friend. Sorry, Jason. Sorry, Jason Chan.
You alive? Did he make it?
He's okay. He had a pretty bruised thigh. We had to go. We weren't strong enough to get it off of him, so we had to actually go get a teacher just to have enough power to get it off.
Yeah, vending machines, especially of 25 years ago, those were heavy duty. So I'm glad your friend made it through with mostly just a bruise.
Surprisingly, we didn't get in trouble on.
We picked the right guy to go get. I can't even imagine. You could probably fill a book with the stories of your time at boarding school, but we'll save that for another episode. News and notes for today. Let's start with the Brewers. Come on. How can we not start with the Brewers when Jesse Winker will begin spring training with no restrictions? In fact, a team official told one of the Brewers scribes that Winker is, quote, doing awesome right now at the team's facility in Arizona, to which I replied with a gif of the dude hitting the ceiling of his car, because Jesse Winker could be really good in Milwaukee. He was hurt last year. We talked about that, I think, on our outfield preview, which hasn't come out yet. More on that in just a few minutes. And he's an important run producer that could be right in the heart of this Milwaukee lineup. And I think pre-trade to Seattle last year, I saw Winker as a guy, if he stayed in Cincinnati, who actually had a shot at getting some MVP votes. I swear that was the ceiling that he was starting to show, with the hit tool being really good and the power getting to a more sustainable level where he might have been able, especially in Cincinnati, might have been able to pop 30 home runs in a full season there. I don't know if that's actually his true ceiling at this point. Maybe I overestimated it slightly, but the bounce back potential is very real, and getting good health reports ahead of spring training make me even more excited about Winker as a good last year's disappointment guy that I want to have on my teams.
Yeah, and the good news is I think there was some consideration for a second surgery. He had the neck surgery, and then he's had some back issues, I guess. And I think that there was, some thought we'll see what happens. And so we've seen what's happened, and, we got the good outcome. So love that. It also, in a best case type scenario, Winker can get out of that DH spot that he's kind of sitting on the Fangraphs depth charts and become a player in that outfield. And if he can play in the outfield, I think would be huge for the Brewers, because it would allow them to maybe platoon Keston Hiura at DH. It would take some pressure off of Garrett Mitchell and Tyrone Taylor. Tyrone, sorry. Just call
Tyrod plays on Sundays.
Yes, that's right. I got the wrong one. And I think that would take some pressure off the two youngest guys in the outfield. And I don't think it's that crazy to think that Winker could play in the outfield. 17, 18, and 19. In 17, he was like a -1 outs above average. In 18, it was -5, 19, -8, 2021, -7, 2022, -10. So he has been going down, but if he can get even back to the -7, -8 range, we're talking about Seth Brown, Hunter Dozier, Brian Reynolds was a -7 last year. Chad Pinder was a -8. So there are some players that that still play in the field that are in this group. Raimel Tapia was a -5. So, if he can get back to -7, -5 to -7 in the outfield, then and for Dynasty leaguers, you're not even just talking about will he play there all year? Can he play there 10 or 20 times this year? And if he is really feeling good, I think the answer is yes. So now you're talking about retaining that outfield eligibility. You're talking about more playing time, not being sort of stuck in the DH situation. So the projections now could be light on playing time because they all have around 500 plate appearances. If he is a guy who plays the outfield and plays DH and is healthy enough to be in there every day, you could get him back up to 550 like last year, or even 600. Although it's kind of amazing, he's never done 600.
Yeah, wrist injuries, a couple other things have slowed him down over the course of his career. So I think the 550 range is where I'm comfortable projecting him, but he's still outside the top 200 in January ADP. I think that's a pretty good value so long as he stays in that range. If he kind of cracks the 175 to 200 range, that's probably more of like a break-even sort of spot for him. But I do like
him because I'm right now at 195 in an NFBC draft, and the best outfielders in the queue are Alex Verdugo, Joey Meneses, Seth Brown, Ramon Laureano, Andrew Benintendi. I still take those guys above Winker, I think.
I think a lot of it depends on if you have enough speed at the point when Winker goes too. If you still need some speed, he's in that group of outfielders that really offers you nothing in that stolen base category.
And he could get back to a good batting average now that he's out of Seattle. That's a really tough place for batting average. So if he gets up to a 260, 275, he's an asset in batting average and home runs, as opposed to just kind of a home run guy, which won't give you like 30 home runs. So he is kind of a weird player that is more kind of depth, oatmeal-y, late player, but I think he's a little undervalued.
Brewers also added Brian Anderson. They have a play-by-play announcer named Brian Anderson. They've had him for 15 years, but Brian Anderson...
Spider-Man meme.
Yeah. Brian Anderson, the former Miami Marlin, is now a member of the Brewers. And I think the initial takeaway, the most likely formation of the lineup is going to include Anderson playing third, Luis Urias playing second. It is probably Winker as the DH most days, even if he does play the outfield, like you said. And then you've got this kind of unknown maybe in right field where for now it's Tyrone Taylor. Perhaps at some point Sal Frelick gets a chance to debut and play that spot. All this is to say the Brewers are getting closer to having a more balanced lineup, right? They've got a little more depth now with this move. I think the Winker trade had been previously overlooked. I mean, they made the big William Contreras trade. It's been a quiet year in free agency for them, but they've been active enough to make this team actively better. Like they really are a better group. Anderson, though, projections are kind of divided on him. So he's versatile. He could play a little bit in the outfield if needed. A big enough arm to play right. So maybe they will also play Anderson some in right and then move Urias back over to third and play Bryce Terang at second. There's a lot of moving parts in terms of how this could actually play out. But for now, I'm giving him most of his playing time at third base, at least to begin the year.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity there. You can bump Luis Urias to second, then you don't have to depend on Bryce Terang. And so I think that's what they're doing. It's a little bit like the Hosmer and Mancini situation in Chicago, where maybe you still like Bryce Terang, maybe you still like Matt Mervis, but you are going to put some representative veterans in front of him just to be more sure of things. Obviously the young guy can come and push this guy out of the way if he wants to. There's nothing about the deal that says that he can't. 1 year and $3.5 million. So, it could just be depth, or it could be your starter all year. And I like it because Brian Anderson is one of these guys, he's just decent at everything. Like really, he's just decent at everything. He's a 53rd percentile runner. He's just a little bit worse than average at making contact. He's just a little better than average at taking walks. He's just around average at chase rate. His barrel rate and max EV are good, but his power results were bad. So I think in this case, they're looking at that and they're saying, hey, if we can get him to pull the ball like he did in 2020, when he made the most use of the same barrel rate that he had last year, and had almost twice as much the power, then we'll do that. We'll try to get him to pull the ball in the air. He's going to come here and say, I'm in Milwaukee, not Miami. I'm not trying to spray the ball around anymore. I'm trying to get it over the fence. And I think that we could see even beyond the bat, who's a little bit more upbeat about Brian Anderson. I would say that we could see even a little bit beyond the bat. The bat has 240 and 15 homers and 490 plate appearances. Honestly, if he does that and he's 10% better than league average and he's the third baseman, I think Milwaukee might just play him. And then you're talking about back up to, 550, 600 plate appearances, and 240 and 17, 18 homers. I think he's a great draft and hold third baseman. I think he's a pretty good NL only investment. I think deep dynasties, this is the type of player who will be in your restocking draft that won't cost you anything and might end up playing for you.
Yeah, you mentioned this, hitting in Miami, it's of course very difficult. The difference for a right-handed hitter making the move out of Lone Depot Park into American Family Field still
just
feels
rolls
weird
off the tongue, man. Just rolls off the tongue.
Ugh, both park names atrocious. It's a 26 point difference in park factor, right? So for a righty, Lone Depot plays in Miami plays as an 86, so well below average for right-handed power. Milwaukee, American Family Field, plays at a 112. So that alone changes a lot about Anderson's output.
And some of it might just be, sort of in his head. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've talked on this podcast about how Andrew Benintendi said, I was in Kansas City, but now I'm going to be in Chicago in the cell. I'm going to try and hit for power again, I think that a lot of times people see certain outcomes and adjust their strategy to fit it. So, he's played in Milwaukee before, and I don't even know what his stats are in Milwaukee, but it almost doesn't matter because he's not going to change his general approach to fit the place he's in once a year. But when he moves there, he can be like, well, I've always liked hitting here, and I do have power. So let me try to unlock that.
Yeah, I think there's a few ways this could actually go right. If he moves up and probably becomes a guy that goes in a 15-team mixed league draft where you actually have moves, I think he's probably going somewhere in the around 25 to 30 range. I think he's going to be very draftable in those formats because we've seen it before. He can be a good accumulator, and I think he does make this lineup a bit better.
Could be an interesting bench piece in sort of your 15-team NFBC type leagues because he would be your backup CI, third base, and outfielder. So it's three positions he's backing up. And if you went heavy on steals and you were like, I'd like to have a guy who can maybe hit might hit some dingers. And then you also, like I like to say on here, you also get decision point pretty early on him. You'll get to see, are they playing him every day or is he, he's a right-hander, right? So, if he's in the short side platoon, then you'll be dropping him pretty quickly.
Right. If Turang has a fantastic spring and they decide they want to play Turang against righties at second base and Ruiz is projected better than Anderson, then Anderson's playing time might dip if he doesn't take over the corner outfield spot. But because there's so many spots where he can collect a lot of playing time, I think it's a risk worth taking. I like being able to make that quick early season decision, though, if the playing time isn't right. I think cost-wise, that's exactly where Anderson is going to go. Some news to pass along, personal news to pass along, because we've started recording our draft kit episodes, and some of the things we've said in those episodes will probably make no sense at all if I don't tell people what's going on. My wife and I are expecting a baby in late February this year, right in the middle part of fantasy baseball draft season. Thank you. So we're very excited. New Brewers fan coming in late February.
New Brewers fan just about to drop.
That's a great way to put it. No, he gets to choose anything but Cardinals or Cubs will be accepted.
You You should do that like choosing ceremony they do in some cultures where you put out different hats, and it's just a choosing of which fandom he's gonna be.
I will accept submissions from anyone who wants to send new hats. I will choose. I will burn any and all Cardinals and Cubs hats that are sent to me. That's just not going to happen.
Well,
we can't let that happen.
I'm super happy for you, and I can't wait to meet him. And also welcome to the crew of No Sleep. Last night, I was woken 5 times by my various animals and children. And so that is actually the new reality for you 10 years from now.
Yes, it's a long-term commitment. It's a dynasty league situation.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
Yeah, for a while I did have one of my children. We have you could own anybody, and I owned one of my children as a prospect, but eventually I needed to fill that space with a more legitimate prospect.
You worked on it for a couple of summers, and you're like, oh, this
it's going to take a while.
Good, not a good use of roster space right now.
Yeah.
Let's see if a few camps can turn things around. So yeah, for the pod, we've got the usual volume of shows coming. We're going to scale up to 4 a week really soon. We still have all the position previews going.
Well, that's you're bearing a little bit of a lead there too.
Yeah, we got a lot of changes with the show that are happening this year. So the Athletic Fantasy Baseball podcast is unfortunately no more, but we're taking a few episodes from that feed and bring them over. So we're going to have a prospect keeper dynasty league centric show. We're going to have our buddy Chris Welsh working with us on that. So that's really exciting. Chris is going to fill in on another day while I'm out for the duration of my leave, whenever that actually begins. Late February, of course, written in pencil. So I'll be gone probably for about 4 weeks when the baby comes, and I'll take some time off again at some point, either later on this season or in the off season. I know so little about being a parent. I honestly can't tell you when I'm taking that second stretch of leave. I wish I could say it with some kind of certainty. We're also going to have our friend Al Melchior helping us out on extra episodes, and the waiver show that we did on the other feed throughout the year on Fridays. We're going to bring that over to Rates and Barrels as well. So a lot of great content joining the feed. Nice to have some familiar voices joining us on the show on a regular basis. Probably going to do more with guests from time to time too, since we're expanding the show to 4 days throughout the year. We'll have a lot of opportunities to catch up with some friends, people that write for The Athletic, people that don't, people we've never met before, right? Like all sorts of new people and voices coming along on Rates and Barrels this year. So it's great. It's a great year of expansion, not only in my family, but also in this podcast feed.
Yes, and the Rates and Barrels family. And I'll be there, and you'll be there when you're back. So there'll be a continuity. It'll still be Rates and Barrels. It'll still be and nerdy as we want to be. But I think this is like, honestly, we've tried to have our prospects of the week, and we do our stat scouting, but it's better to bring someone in, I think, to help us on the live looks aspect of prospects. Welsh is in Arizona and sees these guys, and his prospect pod is something we followed along through the years. So that's going to shore us up there. And then Al is just the consummate professional, and just a great asset for us in terms of some of the nuts and bolts. And I think the Friday show will often be about kind of a waivers thing, as people approach waiver deadlines on Fridays and Sundays and whatever it is. We'll be talking about pickups and drops and things like that from a very sort of focused fantasy perspective. And that will allow us sometimes to talk about whatever study we've just read or whatever, nerdity we want to go into. So in effect, it might allow us to untether and go into the stratosphere sometimes, because we will always be tethered by these, the different things that we're going to do, the 4 shows, so we can get weird sometimes. So I really like it. I think that overall it's going to be a great year for Rates and Barrels.
Nerd score rising on the podcast very quickly with the latest additions. But I'm already wondering, what am I going to sound like with less sleep? How am I going to feel with less sleep? But I'll get to experience that really soon. I'm sure
I bet you
pass
will
along
have
stories.
the ass much more.
I don't know.
We'll get a slightly grumpier Derek Van Riper.
Somebody told me I'm a coffee guy, so I for a long time have been just French pressing coffee, and we're very lucky. My mother-in-law is here for when the baby arrives to just help with meals, all the stuff that we will be exhausted and not want to do, and obviously she'll get to spend time with the little guy right when he arrives too, which is great. And I got a coffee machine again in California. I didn't have one here until recently. Someone said you don't have time to make French presses anymore. I'm like, is it that intense? My schedule is every free minute going to be just completely gone? And I think it's going to be different phases, right? Babies sleep a lot at first, then they start becoming a lot more active. So I will keep my parenthood observations to a reasonable level, both on the podcast and on Twitter, but I will likely share some of my experiences along the way because they will likely be funny as my kid owns me and changes my life in unimaginable and amazing ways.
Well, I think one of the things that's good is that the times that are the toughest often come with great leaps and bounds in their development. So at the very beginning, it's tough because you're not sleeping through the night, but your life for the first month or so is just sleeping and eating. I mean, there's not much time for much else because you're so tired from waking up so many times at night and the baby is just like up for a little bit and then you go back to sleep for 2 hours or whatever. So it's a very much like you're half awake watching Law and Order. That's what we did. We watched all the Law and Order. You're half awake watching Law and Order with a baby asleep on your chest. That's my iconic remembrance of the first few weeks. The time that it gets the toughest is when they become mobile, and especially when they're like early walking and talking, because they want to engage with you all the time and they want to move around, and they become much more dangerous, in terms of like what they can get into and what they can break and what they can hurt themselves with. And so you actually have to have eyes on them and be kind of standing up and like ready. Nope. No, yes, that's great. No, don't do that. And they're almost not even that into tablets and screens yet, so you can't even be like, oh, just give daddy a break here. Sometimes like Coco Melon or whatever, like there are things you can play them, but that's the toughest time. But at least hopefully by then you're sleeping through the night and you got a schedule going. So there's different ups and downs for each of them, but that's how I sort of remember the first couple of years.
A ton for me to learn, to be sure. And
everyone just like me just now is going to tell you about their experience and what you should need to do.
Send hats, send tips, send coffee. I got the machine now, so it doesn't have to be fancy coffee. It's just got to be.
Is it the kind of machine that you can schedule for the morning?
Yeah. Good. So when I'm actually awake enough to make it correctly, then I will
or it's just waiting for you in here.
Yep. Constant coffee in the Van Riper household coming very soon. Rapid fire news items. Kirilloff healthy, taking full swings in off-season workouts. I really like him as another bounce back candidate from a health perspective. Could make the Twins lineup even more dangerous in 2023 if he is in fact finally healthy. So
how does he not play?
I am struggling to come up with a path.
Ruiz plays first, Gallo, Buxton, Kepler in the outfield, Larnach at DH. That's underpowered at first base. Larnach is I think a bigger long shot to be a good hitter than Kirilloff, right?
I think Larnach at this stage of his career, man, is Larnach a better dart than Gallo, or do you think you'd throw a late dart on Gallo if you were just looking for some cheap playing time in a really deep league?
They're kind of similar, very high strikeout, low batting average. I think Gallo's a better athlete. So I think Gallo will play over Larnach in terms of, playing in the outfield. And if you want to try and keep Kirilloff healthy and Buxton, sometimes too, I think the DH is going to be largely guys you're trying to keep healthy. So Correa, Kirilloff, and Buxton seem like my ideal DH solution. You know what I mean? So if that's the case, then I think Larnach's in the minor leagues. Nick Gordon and Kyle Farmer are and Gallup and Celestino are the backups. And then Kirilloff and Arias share first. Or share? I think Kirilloff is the first baseman.
I think he's the first baseman. I think Ruiz moves around a lot. That helps. I mean, this team is so much better with Carlos Correa back in the fold.
Remember we used to do this, build a bench?
Yeah.
What's building a bench? You got how many do you bench? Do you have 4 spots on the bench?
Yeah, I think
you have
4.
13 batters, and you got to have 9 starters. You have to have a backup catcher. Oh, so is it 13 batters and 13 pitchers?
13 and 13 is what a lot of teams are doing.
Oh, yeah. But 9 includes the pitchers. So that doesn't make sense. So it's 8.
No, yeah, you're talking about because the DH.
So 9. So you have 9.
4, and one of them's a backup catcher. So Ryan Jeffers gets 1.
Okay, so then you have 3 more. Caleb Celestino, unless you think Nick Gordon can play center.
Probably have Celestino on the roster. So that's 2.
I think he's probably have Celestino. And you have to have a backup shortstop. So that's Farmer. That's 3. So then it's a question of Gordon or Ruiz. And no way Larnach makes this roster.
Oh, wait a minute. Because Kepler, you get Kepler. Kepler's going to get traded, isn't he?
Okay, if Kepler gets traded, then Kirilloff plays the outfield and Ruiz plays first.
Yeah, because as it's built right now, one of Kepler, Gallo, or Gordon is a backup. Like they can't all 3 be in the lineup if you have Buxton in a spot. So like that's one.
That's why I'm thinking it's like Gordon or Celestino almost. Because you have to have a backup set catcher. So that's 1. You have to have backup shortstop. That's Farmer. That's 2. And you have to have right now. You have to have Ruiz and Kirilloff. So that's one of those guys is 3. So you only have 1 more bench spot for Celestino or Gordon.
They didn't. I don't think they expected to get Carlos Correa back when they ended up adding Kyle Farmer for shortstop depth. But now you don't necessarily need Farmer if you believe Polanco could move over and play shortstop because the other guys you have on the bench, like Ruiz and Gordon, can play second.
That seems like that's out.
That's kind of where I'm at. But all of this is to say, even with that shuffling, I think Alex Kirilloff has a clear path to a large side platoon role. I think that's well within range for him. And I think he can do some pretty good things with that opportunity.
I think if they break camp the way it is, does Celestino have options? Because Nick Gordon does not have options. Celestino has an option.
Gordon's on the roster for sure.
I think they try and fake it without Celestino. Let me see here. Gordon played 244 innings in center field last year. It was the second most he played in any position.
Yeah, so they probably trust him enough to go ahead and do that. Actually, here's the thing about Kyle Farmer that I didn't realize. He's got options left.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's only important once Royce Lewis is healthy.
Man, Kyle Farmer's 32? Is that right?
Yeah. Do you know he led the Reds in like homers, RBI, not WAR? That would be bad. He led the Reds in like 3 categories last year.
Feel bad for our buddy Clay Link. He deserves better. Reds fans deserve better.
Well, we did the 80th percentile projections, and they could win 85 games.
In the 80th percentile.
I'm sorry.
85 games.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
But they're building towards something. They got a lot of high variance prospects in the minors that could go either way.
True. The long-term direction is fine. It's the short-term disaster that is one you want to avert your eyes from. Tommy Pham joins the Mets. What does that mean for the depth chart in New York?
It's hard to tell. Like how often he plays. I like him, and I think he's got a great eye. And he reminds me almost of like a Mark Canha, where it's like a great eye, can hit the ball with power. He goes the opposite way a little bit too much. And I think he's told me that he's thinking about really working on pulling the ball for barrels this year to kind of tap back into his power, because he says this ball doesn't allow him to go the other way the same way he used to. So there's some risk there, but there's also some upside that he does tap into more power. For a team like the Mets, it makes sense just to get as much talent as you can on the roster in every position. For us on the outside, I think it's a little tough. Nimmo is the center fielder. I think Canha. Who do you rather have as the backup center fielder, Canha or Marte?
Probably maybe? Marte.
So then you have Marte as the backup center fielder. In right field, you got Marte with, the backup is Canajar or Pham. And then in left, you've got Cano and Pham. And then the DH, you've got Vogelbach and Pham. So I think Pham is the right-handed DH. It's an unnatural platoon with Cano because he's also a right-hander.
Yeah,
and
someone's getting pushed off this
right-hander.
roster. There's a veteran player that's not going to fit on this opening day roster if they're healthy.
Yeah, you think so?
I think so.
Well, build a bench. Okay, so they have to have Nito as the backup backup catcher. Their backup shortstop is Luis Guillorme.
Right.
So that's two backups right there.
Nito Guillorme. Pham technically counts as a backup even if he's going to play. Because
right.
If you look across, he's not atop the depth chart any spot.
So that's three. So there's one more spot left.
One for Ruff or Mark Vientos or
but I think
Ruff
is the one that's on the outs. So if Brett Beatty makes this roster, if Brett Beatty has a great spring and they decide they really want him, Ruff is the guy that drops out because Pham is a right-handed DH type that can play the outfield. And then if Beatty makes his team, Eduardo Escobar becomes part of the DH situation, backup second baseman. It's going to be pretty rough. In terms of wanting to get maximum playing time out of each of the players on these Mets, I don't think there's almost anyone you can do that with. I'd say Lindor and Alonso are the only two players that could get 650 plate appearances a year.
Who's a better late dart right now, Tommy Pham or Brian Anderson, who we talked about earlier?
Well, what did we just say for Brian Anderson? 550 plate appearances?
That was with Winker. Anderson should be close to that, but probably a little under 550. I think the playing time outlooks are comparable.
Pham plays. This would be the first time he's come into a depth chart this crowded. It's funny. Steamer and the depth charts have him at 350 plate appearances. The Bad X is 539.
Mm-hmm. I think he's going to be more at the higher end of that range because of all the injuries. I mean, Marte is coming off core muscle repair surgery. He's in his mid-30s now. Nimmo's had trouble staying healthy.
Somebody could not even make opening day.
Yeah. And then there's also
I just think that the Brian Anderson upside, not necessarily the playing time upside is more there for me.
Okay. A little younger. Yeah, that's a factor too.
If I knew that they were both going to get 600 plate appearances, I'd take Pham.
All right. Some other minor moves. Adam Duvall joins the Red Sox and is apparently going to play center field. It's worked before, though, as far as cheap power goes. Going to Adam Duvall when no one seems to be interested. Can it work?
And he had a 5 outs above average last year. There were center fielders. Victor Robles had a 6. There's a center fielder behind him. Leody Taveras had a +4. But like I said, center fielders get more chances at tough to get to balls, and they are judged by their tough to get to balls in outs above average. And so therefore you can believe a center fielder's outs above average more than you can believe a corner outfielder's outs above average. And so therefore he does have a center fielder's outs above average, but I don't know if you can believe that he is a center fielder. Therefore, you know what I mean? I think he's miscast there, but they need a shortstop. And so I think it's going to be Enrique Hernandez at short, Christian Arroyo at second, and Adam Duvall in center.
Sweet team.
Do we have to build a bench here?
Oh, do we?
I mean, because it's important. So, Alfaro maybe over Wong.
Yep.
Who's the backup shortstop? Could be Arroyo, but then you need a backup second baseman.
I mean, Valdez.
Who's the backup? Who is that? Who is E. Valdez?
Emmanuel Valdez.
Emmanuel Valdez.
Not sure if he's even...
Can Duvall play second? No, he can't.
That he's even playing center field has been a surprise to me.
Yeah, I know. I'm just kidding.
That's going better than I expected.
Let's see here. What are the free agents at second?
And Manuel Valdez has played 17 innings in his entire minor league career at shortstop. He's definitely not a shortstop.
Josh Harrison, Cesar Hernandez,
Also
Neto
not
Dor.
shortstops. Still not a shortstop.
No, but I'm not giving them shortstop. I'm giving them second because our backup shortstop is our second baseman.
Yeah, it's
so
gross.
They could sign someone. I think they really kind of have a need for backup middle infielder. So people were talking about Elvis Andrus. Yeah, they could be an Elvis Andrus or it could be a Cesar Hernandez type deal. So one of those guys, I think no matter who it is, there is a spot that needs to be filled. So you're going to take Jorge Alfaro, you're going to take a backup middle infielder who we don't know what his name is yet, right?
Mm-hmm. Ref Snyder maybe, and then Dahlback. Is that your combo that you're going with?
But I think you need a backup center fielder. Too. No, you need a backup center fielder. That's why Tapia's in town.
Tapia's there. Yep, that's the other.
So thing. Tapia is the backup center fielder, or Duran beats him out in spring. So if there's opportunity in this depth chart, it is Jaron Duran or Christian Arroyo. And Christian Arroyo's upside is poor. Tristan Casas. Okay, so Tristan Casas and Jaron Duran. Those are still, we're just re-racking last year. Same guys that have the upside. Casas has way more lane for playing time, though. Do you think build a bench is like just like do you think this is like a much ballyhooed segment looked forward to? Should we have like a musical drop for build a bench?
Sounds like a Twitter poll. I think you should throw that Twitter poll out there after we're done today and see how it's received.
This is winning production.
I think the vending machine full of vending machines is the best idea I've ever had, and Twitter doesn't seem to agree. So we'll see if that gets a little more helium over the course of the day. Yeah, agree to disagree with my brilliance. Last transactional thing: Julian Merryweather claimed by the Cubs. That's actually a path for the Jorge Lopez of 2022 to be in the range of outcomes. Maybe it's an 80th percentile outcome. Maybe it's just highly unlikely. But this Cubs bullpen, I don't think it's proven by any stretch of the imagination. But the more I started digging into this group, the more I actually kind of like what they're doing so far. It's not overpowering. It's not elite, but it might be better than people realize. And I think that closer role is pretty much up for grabs.
Let's run through the candidates. Brandon Hughes, 100.5 stuff plus. Boxberger, who has refined his breaking ball, 84 stuff plus. Could be a little low because he's kind of got a great changeup. Changeups are not stuff plus best foot forward. However, he had 1,000 pitches in the system last year, so it's not a sample issue. Rowan Wick, 105.6. He was the leader in the clubhouse. Albert Alzolay, 102.9 in between starting and relieving. So perhaps the most upside among the healthy guys, if Merryweather was healthy. He had a 121 stuff plus. So who's Mr. Rucker here? Michael Rucker, 104. So I've been looking at Alzolay as before the Merryweather signing. I was looking at Alzolay as a guy that I kind of liked. I know that Wick is probably the guy that's on top of most people's depth charts, but a 9.7 or more better number, 23.5% K rate is decidedly below average for a closer. And then you add in poor command. I don't think he is on sure footing at all. So Alzolay, kind of seems to be falling behind Hayden Wesnenski. They've got Caleb Killian. They have Javier Assad. Alzolay seems to be falling behind that group. This could be the spring where they just decide to make him a reliever, and he could become the closer. However, Merryweather, if he's healthy, does put a damper on that. So I'm not going to go heavy in on this because that's a lot of ifs I just put out there, right? Wick is not that attractive to me as the most stable, probably number one on the depth chart guy. Alzolay we haven't even heard that Alzolay is a reliever yet. And Merryweather is always hurt, but Merryweather does sort of he's the kind of the gopher poking his head out the hole, being like, "What about me?"
I think with Alzolay, he had 6 appearances at the end of last season once he was healthy. All of them came out of the bullpen. 5 of them were 2+ innings.
Right.
I think there's
a in between.
He's probably going to get a chance to stretch out this spring, even if they don't end up letting him go deep into spring training with the starters. And then he's probably going to be a multiple inning reliever if he's a reliever. I think if you have a guy like that, instead of going from attempts to get him to go 5 down to 1, use the numbers in between. He's exactly the kind of guy you'd want to use on the days when some of your mid and back end starters go short. And that's going to happen. Right? Or Drew Smiley in the rotation. I think that's the kind of guy that you could typically plan on throwing Alzolay behind, because if Smiley gets to the lineup twice and then Alzolay mows through the lineup once, you're into the 6th, 7th inning with your A bullpen coming in to possibly win a game.
You also kind of need someone who can be on your roster and relieve, but also give you maybe 2 or 3 innings and a spot start when someone's hurt, where you don't have to always go to the minor leagues.
Right. He could be like a Michael King or a Ross Stripling as the range of outcomes. I think there's a longer workload, of course, for someone like Stripling.
I don't know where to draft Alzolay. Like, I don't know the use case. I think it's like a draft and hold, like, last 5 rounds, 10 rounds, last 5 rounds. Yeah. Like just an arm that'll probably play, that has some upside, that, that you're just taking a dart on.
There, and that's like the NL only reserve. It's another way to say that. It's just an interesting pitcher that you could throw in as your last guy some weeks, and you might be pleasantly surprised. A non-zero chance of saves, more likely, I think, multiple innings, and more likely to make it as a starter than as a closer. Still, I think the guy I like is Jeremiah Estrada.
Oh, I forgot about him. No, I love him. Oh my God.
I almost wonder if it's Estrada versus Merryweather over the course of the year, where they're gonna move up the depth chart together.
Estrada had a 132 stuff plus, man. Mm-hmm. He blew the doors off. And his first start, it was even higher, I think. It was just quite the debut. Just to put him into context, he's probably like a top 15 reliever.
By stuff.
Yeah. I mean, he's right there with Jordan Romano.
Yeah, everywhere he's pitched since 2019, Jeremiah Estrada has had a strikeout rate above 30%. Occasionally has some issues with walks, but misses a ton of bats. That's your guy that could be electric, along with Merryweather.
Fangraphs depth chart screwed me. Come on, you got to put Estrada on there, guys.
I don't think it's egregious that he's not on there.
He probably is. There's a little thing where it says +9 more. I guess I can press that.
I'm very loyal to the RotoWire depth charts. He's 5th in their bullpen on the non-closer list for now.
Yeah, no, I love him. I think the only question is, there's some question of do teams really do the thing where they try to keep people cheap? So, maybe Estrada's their 7th inning, secret closer, while Wick stumbles through the 9th.
They're in a division where they can win, so I kind of think they're just going to manage the team in the best way to win games. They can't get that cute with it right now. They don't have that luxury.
And as much as we talk about, like the 7th, sometimes the best players come up in the 7th inning. The 9th inning has the highest leverage, almost always. That's why you see teams start with some guy in the 7th, and if the guy in the 9th is not getting it done, they move the guy who's really good in the 7th to the 9th. That's why that happens, because it turns out most of the highest leverage moments are in the 9th. So, I think he could, even if he doesn't start the year as a closer, I think he'll end the year as a closer, unless Merryweather finally puts together the season that we've all been waiting for.
I'm telling you.
When I say we, I mean me.
Yeah, but I remember with Jorge Lopez, you liked him for a long time. And it was like, can he start? Can he start? Can he start?
And I kept saying he'll be a great reliever.
And finally, he got the chance, and it happened with very little fanfare, and he emerged to be a really good waiver wire pickup closer. And the Orioles even traded him and got a little something back. So I think you could be right on Julian Merryweather. It's still possible. Let's get to some draft strategy, though. You and I are working through a couple of draft and hold leagues right now, and I am fortunately on one of the ends. I'm picking from the 15 spot. I love being on the ends in draft and hold because I can check out for a while, check back in, and then come up with my picks, and I'm not just obsessively on the phone, on the computer. I put this out there on Twitter. I started looking at the projections again because more projections came out this week. The BatX and ATC are both out there, so you can look at those at Fangraphs. You can look them through the auction calculator if you want to. And if you run the BatX, you will see Mike Trout really pops there. Fernando Tatis Jr. really pops in that projection system. And Jacob deGrom also pops by projection. All three of those players have injury concerns. And if you're at the 1-2 turn, I was curious if anybody out there wanted to take a combination of two of those players because they're consistently available at pick 15. And then if you would do it, which two do you like? And then, of course, if you're going to do that, what does the format have to be? Do you do it in a draft champion situation where there's an overall prize component where you have to do exceptionally well to win the biggest prize? Or do you prefer doing it in a satellite league where you're not necessarily going up against everybody else and you're just trying to beat the 14 teams you're going up against? Or is this something you'd consider in a very shallow league, like a 10-team mix that you play with your friends because, the waiver wire is loaded? So there's any number of ways that you can go about this, but I'm just kind of curious how you think about risk that early when the projections are that favorable for a trio of players.
I'm risk averse in the first few rounds, and I tend to, even if there is an overall prize, to want to build a team that can win the local. And the reason I think that is the rake by NFBC is fairly substantial. And if I want to keep playing at NFBC, I need to keep winning a lot of my smaller leagues, just to keep having the money to play again next year. You know what I mean? So I kind of want to aim to win all my ones, and then maybe I'll just get lucky on one of the ones I'm winning, and there's an overall strategy there. I know, I think that's probably pretty different from some of the real heavy hitters in the NFBC that aim to win draft champions and make more high variance decisions. But I do not have a large bankroll dedicated to the NFBC, so I'm not rolling in with double digit thousands of dollars that I'm willing to dedicate to this enterprise. So, I think that, and probably for many of our listeners, they have the same feeling where they'd rather win their local. So I'm out on that much risk. I will say that in a draft champion situation, I'd be a little bit more likely to say YOLO and do it. And Jacob deGrom is so good that that's a 160 inning projection. So it's not like they put him into 200 innings. That's a 160 inning projection. However, 160 innings seems like a stretch for him. And if you get him and Tatis, and let's say deGrom is just a little behind in the spring for some reason, and he'll debut 2 weeks into the season, then the first 2-3 weeks of the season, your two top draft picks are not on your team. And they're on your bench, which is rough.
So there were a lot of interesting responses to this when I put it out there. And I guess I want to share a little bit about how I would think about the problem. I think about Mike Trout more than just the injury risk, right? I think part of being willing to draft Trout at the 1-2 turn or early in round 2 or wherever he's going to end up falling, usually between pick 15 and pick 25 at the latest. It's completely fine from a pure value perspective. It's a little weird because if you expect to get a lot of your stolen bases from the outfield, he doesn't run anymore. So then you have to start thinking about what the next couple of rounds look like and who you're going to take in those spots and who's going to be available for you to take in those spots. And then the problem, it can kind of cascade pretty quickly. Let's just say we talked about third base. People are going to hear that preview soon. Third base falls off really hard. And let's say your parachute option at third base is Alex Bregman, another very good player who doesn't run. You need to have a plan in place where if you feel like you take Bregman, you're still going to have enough stolen bases. He's an early rounder who doesn't run. Right? Corey Seager is another early rounder who doesn't run. There's only so many player types like that you can put with Trout. So I think you have to consider your strength as a player and what is likely to happen over the course of the early and middle rounds of your draft. And you have to be able to decide, am I good enough and comfortable enough with these players to round out my speed foundation if I'm going to take on that risk, aside from the health concerns that you might have about Trout. Whereas with Tatis, we know he does everything when he's healthy. You don't have that concern. You just have the injury risk. So I do think Trout is a more difficult player to
also
take
the times he's
range.
not playing and the risk of coming off a steroid suspension, what the play is going to be like.
Right. Yeah, there's performance risk that way for sure.
But I think you're right. This is also a KDS question, which is like, where do you want to draft in the first? Because you can kind of map it out. Trout right now in Draft Champions. Oh, this is not right now. I had it in right now, and then it got off. Trout right now in Draft Champions is going. Yeah, he's going in the middle of the second. So I don't know that I would push him so hard to take him around the turn. But Tatis is going around the turn. And I'm sure DeGrom, even though he's going at the end of second, I'm sure he's gone there. But a fairly high risk choice for you at the turn might be Burns Tatis.
Yeah, I went Burns Trout. Tatis was there. It was an option.
But no, so with going with Trout, then you look ahead to who's going to be available, most likely by ADP in the third and fourth, where you go again. And I think in your case, I think you maybe did this, or at least we talked about it while you were doing it. You identified maybe Mullins.
Yep, I had Mullins, Randy Arozarena, and Luis Robert
as your possible speed choices. And what did you end up with?
I went another direction. I went Will Smith, and I went Ryan Presley. Because so this gets better. So now I passed on both of those guys, and so
now the fifth and sixth, who was available for you?
Well, see, in the fifth and the sixth, for a moment, it looked like one of Ozzie Albies, Jazz Chisholm, Corbin Carroll, or Cedric Mullins would be there. And as it turned out, made it. Two of them did. Carroll and Mullins were there.
Oh, but then you got to take Mullins, I think.
I really wanted to. And I didn't.
What?
I took Alex Bregman. Probably
because you were worried about third base. We just
had a conversation about third base yesterday that made me think, all right, if I don't take Bregman here and I'm light on steals, I have to roster Ke'Bryan Hayes. And I don't necessarily want to do that. I took Bregman with Tyler Glass now at the 5-6 turn. So now I've got two starters, a closer.
You have no steals. So now let's look at the 7th and 8th.
I've got zero. I've got probably 0 steals through 6 rounds, but my team is awesome.
And look how bad your 7th and 8th steal candidates are. Tyler O'Neill.
Let me run through who's available
Byron
right
Buxton.
Now. I'm 15 picks away from my 2 turns. Tommy Edman is falling. Probably won't make it back to me. So yeah. I'm going to guess Tommy Edman goes. O'Neill Cruz probably goes before I get a turn. Andres Jimenez might be there. Tim Anderson has a very good chance of being there, I think. So I got a couple shortstops that can run. So I'm fine.
You could take your middle infield there and add, 40, 45 stolen bases there.
I am also thinking that at some point, Gleyber Torres, probably not at this turn, maybe at the next one. I may have to jump him up. Gleyber Torres could actually make a lot of sense for this team at second base because second base falls off pretty hard, not as bad as second base falls off hard. But it's not as top heavy as third.
But another thing that's interesting to me is we're talking. So I'm looking at the ADP chart and trying to guess what your options were, and they were pretty different. Like I did guess Corbin Carroll and Cedric Mullins correctly, right? Or Cedric Mullins in the first batch, and then Corbin Carroll in the second batch. But in this next batch, I'm talking about Tyler O'Neill and Byron Buxton. You're saying Tim Anderson or Tommy Edman and Andres Jimenez, people that ADP says shouldn't be available. And the lesson I'm taking from this is that you can do KDS and you can plan out what you think might be available before the draft, where you say, oh, I'm going to go Machado Burns at the turn, and I'm going to get Mullins and Romano because that's what the ADP says, and I like that. I like that that foursome. Gives me a starter, a reliever, steals, an infielder. Boom. I love that foursome. You might get that because drafts are, can be fairly similar in the first 2 to 4 rounds. by the time you get to the 5th and 6th, there are 14 other managers, you know what I mean, doing vastly different things, different strategies, all sorts of other things. Different pockets of players are going to become available. You're going to start to see that looking at ADP is not really in this format. I'm looking at ADP as a board. It's not going to be useful in that way anymore. You know, it kind of goes out the window. So if you do KDS, map out who you think you'll get in the first 4 rounds, and that's it. Don't bother mapping out after that, I don't think, because I think chaos just starts to infuse the draft. And the difference, you know, I was able to guess Mullins pretty quickly. I was not able to guess any of what you said in terms of the 6th and 7th, or the 7th and 8th round turn. So, you know, I think that's a valuable thing for people to think about is, you know, if you're planning a draft, think about the first 4 rounds, think about who you might come out with the first 4 rounds. Think if you'd like that as your basis. For example, I went from the 6th slot, and I liked that because I wanted Kyle Tucker in the first, but I got auto drafted into Edwin Diaz in the 2nd. That would have been either Real Muto or Paul Goldschmidt for me if I hadn't taken Diaz. And I would prefer to pick ahead of that decision. I would prefer to pick early in the 2nd round because you can get Rafael Devers, Austin Riley, Pete Alonso. You can get those guys in the 2nd round if you're early in the 2nd round. You cannot get those guys if you're late in the 2nd round. So for me, I want KDS. I want, you know, sort of 10 to 15. I want in there. I want to pick in there before I pick earlier than that. And I'm not even looking at what I think would happen in round 5. You know, KDS says I should get Corey Seager in round 5. That's not useful to me. I don't think that's, you know, what's going to happen.
I think you can try. You can try to figure it out more from the player type's perspective than the specific player's perspective. So look at 5, 6, 7, even round 8. What's the quality of stolen base players in that range? What's the quality of save sources in that range? The specific players, that's a little harder to map out that far down. If you think saves are almost certainly going to be completely dried up, at least for the closers you trust to get your first closer by the end of round 6, don't mess around and try and thread that needle perfectly. Like, take advantage of one of those turns in the
jump a guy if you have to.
Yeah, just make sure you don't fall off that cliff. And I think that's what I was doing a little bit with Bregman, was saying, okay, I don't want to be forced into drafting Brian Hayes, in part because someone else might take him. The guy that I thought was going to get me 20 steals that I needed from third base, someone else liked him too. He's gone, and now I'm 20 steals short, and I have a position open that doesn't even offer the category I need. I felt like leaving the outfield open longer, passing on Cedric Mullins, passing on players like that made some sense because there were still steals later from the position. Same with second base, even looking at someone like Jazz. Like, I could just wait a little longer, find someone who's second base eligible who runs some. They might not have the ceiling that Jazz Chisholm has, but they're still getting me the categories I need. So my thought is that as I go through this, round 7, round 8, round 9, round 10, every hitter I take in these next 4 rounds, whether that's 2 or 4, it could be all 4 picks, could be hitters, I guess, depending on how it breaks. Every hitter I take is going to get me at least 10 steals. They might all get me 15, and some might even get me 20. And that's okay. If I end up with, let's say I get 50 steals in the next 3 picks. If I have 50 steals through the first 10 rounds, I'm not that far behind. There's still speed that I can get late. That's why you sent me the "you're going to get Esteury Ruiz" message yesterday, which did seem very threatening. But like, no, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to let it come to that. I think sometimes the market, the field, the other people in the room can be unnecessarily aggressive with a category. Oftentimes it's speed or saves. And I think if you're playing to make sure you're balanced, you have to be willing to wait on one of the two. I am much more willing to wait on steals than I am on saves. So if I'm going to commit early draft picks to something, it's going to be to at least the one closer I trust. And if I can get surplus value in potentially average homers, runs, RBIs by taking guys who don't run, I'm going to go ahead and do that and take my chances, because I think that's where there's some bigger picture value to be had. But again, that comes from working up from the back and not ending up with guys like Ruiz. If I thought I was going to end up with Ruiz, I wouldn't be doing this.
one thing that occurs to me is like, why are all these teams changing their outfield dimensions and becoming much more neutral home parks? It's so that they can jump at any opportunity, any potential bargain that may want to sign with them won't not sign with them because they're too much of a pitcher's park or too much of a hitter's park, right? Like what potential bargain pitcher is going to sign in Coors? No, they have to overpay for anything they can get. They have to get Daniel Bard off the scrap heap. They can't, they get last chance saloon type players. There's no like, Ross Stripling, who like maybe he's actually a decent signing for the Giants. The Giants can gobble him up. And so maybe the Giants, inability to land Carlos Correa or Aaron Judge is related at least partially to the park. And so maybe they haven't gone all the way there yet, but they have changed their things. And the reason that I think this is relevant to what we're talking about is if you take well-rounded players that steal bases and do everything early on, you're keeping yourself open for whatever you want to do later. That was something that was a little bit different about the conversations about our two teams. In my conversation, I was talking about sort of positional needs, and you at one point said, "Oh, well, do you need steals or homers?" And I kind of added them up for you, and you were like, "You don't seem like you need steals or homers," which means now I can just go wherever I think the value is. I can take Ryan McMahon to be my third baseman. Late. I took him I thought real late compared to what his projected dollar value was, right? And he's my corner infielder. And the reason, and just for context, I guess, I took Ryan McMahon in the 13th round to be my corner outfielder. And that's because I wasn't at all concerned with do I need to get steals? Do I need to get batting average, or do I need to, there's a lot of you'll get reaches, I think, in this area. I don't particularly think Tyro Estrada is a great pick. He went in the 12th. That's because his team did not have a second baseman and was light on steals, in the meantime. So, I think I'd rather have McMahon that I took later. That's just one example, but I'm not boxing at any corners. Whereas because you did get ahead, so you're going to have a build that's more kind of shuttles from extreme to extreme, right? Like you build up a lot of homers and batting average, and like that's good, but now your needs are much more defined, and people around you also know that better, right? So somebody who's picking 14 is like, that dude has no steals. If I want steals, I better take him before the turn. And so anybody you're looking at that has steals, if they need steals at all at 14, they're like, well, Derek has no steals, so I'm going to take Tommy Edman. I'm not going to let him to get Tommy Edman. You know what I mean? So like you start to get sniped and stuff. And I've noticed this where I like to leave pitching. And, I'm through 13 rounds, and maybe I'm light on pitching because I have Diaz, Woodruff, Glasnow, May, and Rasmussen. There are other teams that have more pitchers. But I also see that as my pick starts coming up, like my favorites just go away. My ranks are published in the 9th round. I thought maybe I need a third pitcher, and right before my turn, it went Severino, Snell, Lodolo, Green. You could not have decimated my rankings any better. Those guys they're basically 18 through 22 in my rankings. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I would have loved to have gotten a third pitcher in my top 20, and I would have been like, ha, 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 suckers. I got Hunter Green, nanny boo boo. And they just absolutely wiped me out because they knew I needed a pitcher and they knew what my ranks were. So being less predictable has a value. Being as well-rounded as possible, as long as you can be, has some value. But also I appreciate what you're saying about building up surplus in certain places too, because, Trout by projections should be in the first round.
Right. So I'm taking advantage of that value. The cost of taking advantage of that value is knowing that I'm going to have to hustle for my speed sooner rather than later to avoid the Esteury Ruiz problem. As long as you believe there are enough players in between the first 6 rounds and Ruiz territory that will get you to the target you want, you can be okay. But you're right about people in the room picking up on it. I think the only thing that might bail me out is that if they already have enough speed, they might not be looking at speed. They might be looking at the guys who don't run, who go in the pick 100 to 200 range.
They might have created needs by going heavy on speed earlier. They might have created some needs otherwise.
So we're looking for different things at different times, which might give me a position that allows the things I need to actually make it back to me. I'm hoping, I could be wrong about this, I'm hoping that's part of how it plays out as well. And I wonder if I look back at this and I say, Tyler Glasnow, that was my shot. If I didn't take Glasnow there, I could have had Mullins. I could have had a 25-30 steal guy in the outfield right there. And that maybe will prove to have been the better way to go. But my thought was that a lot of other pitchers that are going to go in the next 50 to 60 picks have nothing close to the projection and ceiling of Glasnow. I felt like Glasnow, even though I pushed him up a little bit relative to where he's been going, was still undervalued. And I think we're going to get to March and Tyler Glasnow is going to be going consistently in the first 5 rounds. I think that's the direction we're headed. So this won't even look like a reach once we get more information in these next 2.5 months.
I took him as well. I took him. I had the benefit, since I wasn't at the turn, I was in the middle. I think I took him a little bit later than you, in the middle of the 6th. I did. It was a little bit rough in terms of what I thought my other needs were, but it didn't cost me that much. And to pair him with Woodruff, I felt great. People in the draft are very conservative about injury risk a lot of times, except with DeGrom, which is weird for me. But there were people like, I just don't know how many innings he'll pitch, and I don't know, about the playing time. There's usually a Tommy John honeymoon for the first 300 innings after Tommy John, as long as you've pitched in the big leagues. I doubt he's going to go down for a Tommy John right away. And then he also has a fairly big carrot in the form of the free agent year, the year after next. I think the best way for him to enter that free agency period is to pitch as many innings as he can in the next 2 years. So I think personally he wants to do that. Maybe the team will manage some innings, but I think they would manage them a little bit later in the season, depending on whether or not they're making the postseason. If they're headed towards the postseason, maybe they give him a 2-week blow because they want to use some of his innings in the postseason as opposed to getting to the postseason. But by that time, you would have banked a lot, I think, from Glasnow. So I'm into the Glasnow thing there. Another thing you just said that I think is important to think about, you were talking about doing things, looking in different places at different times than the rest of the room. And one way that I use projections and try to mesh that with what's happening in the room is that I will basically set a sort of tier in my projections and say, okay, I'm going to put in my queue everybody who's worth more than $10, just so I can see who projections say are worth more than $10. And invariably, if you do this, especially if you do it at like $15 early in the draft, you say everybody who's over $15, I'm putting them in my queue. You will find that you put a ton of catchers in there. And you put a ton of catchers in there, and you're like, wow, this says Sean Murphy's worth $24, and everybody's picking $15 players right now. I should take Sean Murphy. However, if you did what I said, you will see, there's like 6 catchers in here, and there's 2 shortstops. And maybe the shortstop that I have in here is only worth $15, and my projection system says Sean Murphy is worth $24. But the supply and demand is such that I may not get a $15 shortstop if I don't take one of these 2, and I'm still might get a $20 catcher if I wait another round. And so that's how I use the projections. It's not, I don't think it's, I used to be like, you have to take the guy, especially in auctions. It's a little bit more like you want to spend what your numbers say you should spend.
Yep.
That's a little bit more. You want to do what your numbers say. But when in a snake draft, I think you're more like you're just trying to collect as much value as you can. And so, it's no longer like I should, like, you don't want to just, you wouldn't take, like, just as an extreme case, you wouldn't take 4 catchers in a row just because they were all worth $24. Like that wouldn't make any sense. You still have to build a team. So my method of sort of collecting all the players I like in a certain queue so that I can see the supply and demand within a tier has been pretty useful for me. And that allowed me, for example, to take Sean Murphy in the 8th round after Alejandro Kirk, Will Smith, Salvador Perez, JT Realmuto, Wilson Contreras, Adley Rutschman, all of those guys had, and Menje Melendez went ahead of Sean Murphy. So I still got someone in the tier of acceptable catchers. I believe my projection system had a $22 value for Murphy. So, I was like, I'm cool with that. But I took a Tim Anderson. I think they had like an $18 projection in my numbers. I think Bregman had an $18 or $19 projection. I took those guys all ahead of Murphy because of the law of supply and demand.
Right, because Murphy could still be there later. That is exactly why Bregman ended up on this team and Cedric Mullins didn't. It's the belief that I can find another Cedric Mullins type player or a lighter version of that player that's very close, easier than I can find a Bregman type player at third base right now. I
suppose you could make the case that like you'll see Jake McCarthy later. You could make the case. I mean, we in the outfield, which we haven't heard yet, but we've already recorded. There are some risks with Jake McCarthy, but in terms of projections and possibilities, Jake McCarthy's right there with Cedric Mullins.
He fits this roster really well, which is
10 to 15 homers and 30 stolen bases. Yeah.
You'll understand why there's a little bit of pain as I say he fits this roster really well because
once you
talked about the warts
episodes,
we all have that to look forward to once that drops. But yes, we are rapidly approaching the position preview portion of the year, and we'll get those episodes dropping very soon. Got a nice little supply of them. It's weird. We rarely pre-record episodes of this show. So when I'm sitting on like 5+ episodes of Rates and Barrels that people haven't listened to yet, it's really kind of a strange feeling. I feel like I'm doing something wrong by hoarding the episodes. Like, we recorded these and you can't listen to them.
We know. My favorite is first base. So hopefully you start with first base. That was a good episode. Not that none of the other ones were, but we're so hard at work that like we're changing our hoodies and t-shirts and taking hats off and putting them on just to give you guys different looks on the same day.
I realized that I made one mistake. There's a box over my shoulder with a blanket in it, and it hasn't moved in a few days. So there's a lot of episodes where that
box in the blanket
foiled again. Slight mistake on my part. I'm just not that good at deceiving people. Which is
weird if one of us got a haircut in the middle.
Lots of things we could change that would be very odd based on the order of the episodes. But if you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, this is a good time to get one leading into the season. TheAthletic.com/rates and barrels gets you in the door for $2 a month for the first year. Really can't beat that price. You can find Eno on Twitter at EnoSaris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. As always, emails are welcome. Rates and barrels at theathletic.com. as I continue to push for inbox 0, hopefully before baby's arrival, because it's not happening.
It's not happening after.
It is over. Inbox 0 is a dream that will go away with the arrival of my son. But hey, you can tell that I'm a soccer person because I think we talked about babies for about 12 minutes. And then we added 12 minutes at the end in stoppage time.
Extra time.
So I know the inevitable tweets of, dude, no one cares. Like, I get it. We're not going to take away content. We're going to give you the time back. So if you ever like, stop talking about kids, just hit the fast forward button a couple times and we'll be out of it and you'll get the content back on the back end. But that's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you next week.
Thanks for listening.